Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What If Deku Wielded One for All Without Limits. Strive for a place among gods and you shall reach it. Izuku Midoriya's desire to be a hero was so strong that it brought to the world of Quirks a power never seen before. A power so strong and unique that it will lay down the foundations for a new era of peace and prosperity. The burden on his shoulders was great, but his will was greater. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. I know that no one is born equal, muttered a 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya shakily as he stood in front of the injured boy that was being bullied before he intervened. His small body trembled as he held up his shaking fists, green eyes wide in terror as he stood his ground. But that doesn't give you the right to use your quirk to harm others, Koch-chan. He shouted vehemently, his body language betraying his fear. Oi, Deku, said an ash-blonde-haired kid with red eyes as he started to grin evilly. Who the hell do you think you are telling me what I can or can't do, huh? He smacked one first into his other palm, and the sound of a small firework resounded in the curiously deserted park, as a small explosion resulted from the actions of the red-eyed kid. Izuku shook his head in disbelief as he stared at his former friend. While Katsuki Bakugo had never been what you would call a nice kid, he never used to go out of his way to hurt and belittle others before his quirk manifested. After that happened a few months ago, Katsuki changed for the worst, and now he never let any chance to bully anyone with a weaker quirk than him, or with no quirk at all. And while Izuku fell on the second category, as his own quirk has yet to manifest, he was not about to stand aside and do nothing, while Katsuki used his gift to hurt others. If there was one thing Izuku hated above all was when those with power preyed on those weaker than him. Being so young, he couldn't put into words, but Izuku knew that with certainty. Those with the gifts of a quirk should only use them to help others or humanity progress in general. That was the reason why he stood in front of the defenseless kid, even though he was defenseless himself. Intellectually, Izuku knew that he didn't have a chance standing up to Katsuki and attempting to stop him from doing what he wanted to do. His heart and his sense of what was wrong and right, however, prevented him from listening to the recommendations of his brain, to just run away and leave the situation be, since it had nothing to do with him. His morals told his heart to help the kid and his ear responded in the affirmative, forcing his brain to move his body, in order to do what was right. "You're worthless," yelled the chubby kid from his position on the air, his red bat wings being the reason why he could fly. "Actually, he is quirkless. But it's basically the same," shouted the other kid, his fingers on the left hand were stretched until they were longer than he was tall many times over. Izuku grit his teeth as he shakily stood his ground. "My quirk has yet to manifest, that's true. But if you use your quirks to harm others then you don't deserve them." The two boys flanking Katsuki glared at him, and the Ashen blonde-haired boy twitched, and his face contorted into an ugly scowl of anger and scorn. "You're overreaching, Deku," he shouted before he shot himself forward, followed by his lackeys, and they began to hit Deku all over his body, making him cry in pain, as tears leaked from the corner of his eyes. While this happened, the kid that Izuku was trying to protect quickly stood up and ran away without looking back. Izuku saw this, and while it saddened him that the kid ran away without hesitating to see if he could help him, he was still glad that he managed to help him. In the end, that was what mattered the most to him. To be able to help others. That was why he couldn't help for his quirk to manifest so he could become a hero. Even though he was the only kid his age in town whose quirk has yet to manifest, he was still hopeful. Izuku suddenly covered his face, and he shouted in pain as his arms were burned due to the small explosion caused by Katsuki's fist, smacking against his forearms instead of his face, which apparently was what he had been intending. Through the pain in his tears, Izuku lowered his arms a bit, and he glared at Katsuki in defiance. Now that he was hurting too much to be afraid, Izuku could find the courage to consciously stand up to Katsuki. For a moment, Katsuki faltered as he felt something that made the hairs of the back of his neck stand up as a shiver went down the length of his spine. He looked down at Izuku to see him glaring up at him from behind burned arms, his green eyes like steel as he grunted and cried due to the pain caused by the continuing strikes of the other two kids. A particularly nasty shot to Izuku's flank, however, made Izuku close his eyes as he shouted in pain. Katsuki shook his head before he glared at Izuku before he cocked his fist back, grinning evilly. Now in a world of pain after being hit in the liver, Izuku wished for it to go away. As much as he wanted to help, like any other sane kid his age, he disliked pain of any kind, and when pain that was above of what could be endured, the first instinct was to stop interacting with the cause of that pain. Since Izuku was being pinned down from all sides as he was punched all over, he couldn't get up and escape. Unknown to him, however, to escape from the pain he didn't need to escape. As the desire for the pain to stop grew stronger the more he was hit, unknown to anyone there, Izuku's skin began to slowly harden and darken beneath his clothes. That was unnoticed by everyone but Izuku, as it was covered by his burnt and ruffled clothes. Izuku, however, distinctly felt how each hit became less painful and easier to endure. I can barely feel their strikes, and Koch-chan's explosions feel like a normal punch, albeit warmer. Is this my quirk? Izuku wondered in delight, only to shout in pain as he was once again hit with the same amount of strength as before. What? No. Come back. His plight went unanswered as he wished for his quirk to come back, and he once again had to endure a beating in the hands of Katsuki and his lackeys. His attacker continued to pummel him without apparently noticing anything strange happening. And, as he was finally losing consciousness due to the amount of hits and the pain, Izuku Midoriya felt certain that for a moment there he felt his quirk activating. He passed out and a pained smile appeared on his face, believing that he finally stopped being quirkless. A few seconds later, Katsuki and his friends stopped pummeling the unconscious form of Izuku. With a derisive scoff and spitting next to the unmoving body of the one he saw not even worth the air he was breathing, someone that was a waste of space, he turned around and walked away. His two lackeys laughing as they bragged to each other about the beating they just gave to Izuku. You better give up. It is impossible for you to develop a quirk, said the doctor almost uncaringly as he stared, seemingly bored, at the young kid and his mother. Izuku Midoriya's eyebrow twitched in irritation at the way the doctor had so crassly said something that could possibly crush her dear son's spirit. Her eye flicked towards him, and she gave a sigh of relief when she saw that he was more confused than anything else, though he was also speechless. She had taken him to the doctor to treat the injuries he sustained at the park for falling to the ground, that was, he told her at least, while he was playing, and they had taken the opportunity to check why his quirk has yet to manifest. Is there something wrong with him, doctor? Other kids his age have already manifested their quirks, and my Izuku is the only one in his kindergarten that hasn't yet, she said, her voice sharp when she asked the question, but turning worried as she continued speaking. The doctor met in though for a second. You are a fourth generation, if I am not mistaken, right madam? I am, of course, speaking in terms of quirk. Izuku nodded and she wiggled her fingers, and the All Might figurine that had been resting in her son's lap came floating towards her. Yes. I can attract small objects to me and manipulate them a bit, she explained. Her countenance darkened a bit and her eyebrow twitched in irritation again. And my dear husband can breathe fire. As much as she loved Hisashi, Izuku's father, his penchant for getting jobs abroad and only being home for a total of maybe 2 months per year, was a source of anger for Izuku. The doctor nodded, and he motioned towards an X-ray of Izuku's left foot. The norm for a quirk to manifest is 4 years old at the most. Your son has already reached that age a few months ago, and he has yet to manifest his quirk. If you take a look at this, you can see that your son has 2 joints on his pinky toe. As quirks began to manifest in people, the presence of a second joint in the pinky toe has been proven to be absent in those who have developed quirks. This means that the chance for your son to develop a quirk even as a late bloomer, of which there have been a few cases throughout history, is less than 0, he explained bluntly. Izuku resisted the urge to hurl the All Might figurine at him, and she settled for glaring at him for the ungentle manner in which he was crushing her son's dreams. She turned towards her Izuku to assure him that everything was going to be alright, and that she loved him with all her heart, despite him not having a quirk. Her eyes widened, however, when saw her gentle and polite son glaring heatedly at the doctor too. It seemed like he had inherited something more than her looks from her. You're lying. He shouted with vehemence she had not witnessing from him. He hesitated for a moment, and Inko's eyes widened further when she saw the guilty expression on his face before he turned towards the doctor. These injuries weren't the result of me falling while I was playing. A kid that had no quirk like me was being bullied by other kids with quirks. When I stepped up to help him, they focused on me and beat me up. When that was happening, I for a moment felt their hits weakening. Even Koch-chan's explosive punches only felt warm against my skin for that moment. That had to be my quirk. The doctor stared at him for a moment before he shook his head. That's impossible. You were just imagining things, I assure you, he said uncaringly. Already fed up with his attitude, Izuku sharply stood up before she grabbed Izuku's hand and gently pulled him off his own chair. That's quite enough, doctor. Thank you for time. I will leave your payment with your secretary at the front door, she said stiffly before bowing slightly. Pulling her son along with her, she left the doctor's office. As he was being dragged away, Izuku turned around and glared at the doctor. Said doctor locked eyes with Izuku for a moment, and he shuddered as he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Everything went back to normal when the mother and son duo disappeared behind the door that was closed with more strength than was strictly necessary. Shaking his head at the odd occurrence, the doctor turned back to his work. In his haste to be done with them, the doctor never noticed that the X-ray images were just a tad darker than what they were normally supposed to be. "Izuku, why did you lie to me about how you got hurt in the park?" asked Inko, not unkindly but with a certain sternness that told Izuku that should he lie to her again, he was going to regret it the moment they got home. Izuku faltered for a second before he looked down to his feet. I didn't want for Koch-chan and the other to get in trouble," said Izuku honestly. As much as he hated what Katsuki Bakugo had turned into after getting his quirk, he was still friends with the Katsuki Bakugo that didn't have a quirk. It was because of those fond memories that he didn't want to get his former friend in trouble. Seeing the conflict in her son's eyes and knowing that kind of relationship he used to have with Katsuki, Inko sighed with fond exasperation as she knelt down in front of him and wrapped her arms around him. "Being so noble is something worth admiring, Izuku, but if you don't let Bakugo-kun learn that his bad actions have bad consequences, then he is never going to learn that what he is doing is wrong. And if he doesn't learn that soon, then he will eventually mess with someone that is not going to take his bullying, someone that will strike back harder than even he could handle." Izuku looked up at his mother as she told him this, and as he analyzed her words, he nodded in understanding and acceptance. Izuku was smart enough, even at his age, to understand what she was saying. For a moment, he wished he could be the one to teach Katsuki the wrongness of his ways, but the fact that he couldn't control his own quirk, and his surprising lack of interest of renewing his friendship with him, lead up to his decision of just letting him be. If his mother was right, Katsuki would learn eventually. He just hoped that when that time came, it wouldn't be with dire and permanent consequences for him. Seeing that she managed to make her son understand, Inko smiled, though if one looked closely enough, one could see how strained it was. While Izuku was unwilling to let Katsuki be punished for his bullying, Inko had a very different opinion on the matter. It seemed like she was going to have a talk with Mitsuku very soon. She made a mental note of that for the near future, and instead focused on the other things she wanted to speak with her son. "Earlier on you insisted on your quirk having developed despite the esteemed doctor claiming otherwise using the results of your test as proof." She prompted him to elaborate without actually asking him to do so. And Inko wholeheartedly believed her son when he said that he finally developed his quirk. Izuku was not a liar and foremost and secondly, if there was something she knew her son dared not to joke about was about quirks and being a hero. So, there was no way in hell that her son was lying when he said that his quirk developed. What did it matter what an asshole doctor said? When quirks started to appear in humans, they had 2 joints in their pinky toe, so who was he to assure with 100% certainty that Izuku couldn't develop a quirk when he had 2 joints on his pinky toes too? To her, Izuku developing a quirk despite everything pointing to the impossibility of it was more plausible than it not happening simply because he said so. Izuku's eyes brightened, and he smiled in excitement as he made tiny fists with his hands. "I don't really know what my quirk can do, but I definitely felt it. When Koch-chan and the others were hitting me, I felt their punches starting to lose power, and in Koch-chan's case, his explosive punches only felt warm or just a bit stronger than the others." He paused for a second before smiling sheepishly. The weird thing is that it only lasted for a few seconds before it went away, and it didn't come back no matter I wished for it to do so." Inko nodded in understanding before she stood up and smiled kindly at him. "That's because you went about it the wrong way. Wishing for your quirk to work is not going to make it work. To use your quirk, you must recreate both what you were feeling and what you were thinking the moment it activated. For example, when I use my quirk I don't think attracted to me, but rather I want it here. Your quirk is a part of you, and as such, you must use it as if it was your legs when you are walking, instead of how you use your fingers when deliberately want to grab something. Did you get that?" Izuku nodded. "Yeah," he said before he closed his eyes and thought back to what he was feeling the moment he felt his quirk activating. He remembered vividly Katsuki and his friends pummeling him to the ground, hurting him beyond everything he had felt. He remembered feeling glad that it was him who was being attacked and not the other defenseless kid, and feeling satisfaction at doing what was right. He remembered block Koch-chan's punch and glaring at him defiance, feeling and seeing how uncomfortable Koch-chan looked when they locked eyes. Then he recalled the shot to his kidney and how much it had hurt, and how much he wanted the pain to stop. That was exactly when the punches that were being rained upon him started to hurt less and less. With this in his mind and knowing what he had to do thanks to his mother's explanation, Izuku focused on remembering how much he was hurting, and how much he had wanted for the pain to go away and to not reach him. "Izuku, Hearing the ecstatic tone in his mother's voice, he opened his eyes to see that she was grinning from ear to ear, and that she was excitedly pointing at his hands. He looked down to where they were at chest level, and he gasped in happiness when he saw that they were covered in a black substance that had a shine to it. It went from the tip of his fingers to just past his wrist. As he lost focus, he saw the black substance starting to recede, but now that he knew how it felt, he managed quickly regain it again, and it stopped receding into his fingertips. "Whoa," he exclaimed as he looked at his hands. He opened and closed them, expecting to meet some kind of resistance when he did so because the black substance that now covered them looked extremely sturdy. His eyes widened when he felt nothing like that. As a matter of fact, he felt just like he normally did except for the energy, for lack of a better word, that he felt going from everywhere on his body to the substance that now covered his hands. "It looks like some kind of armament," mused Inko as she looked at the shiny blackness that were his son's hands. She tried to ignore the feeling of the hairs of her arms and nape of the neck, standing up to attention the moment Izuku began to use his quirk. It seemed like there was something more to it than the very cool and sleek-looking black substance that was covering his hands. Izuku nodded his head slowly as he continued to flex his hands in wonder. "Yeah. But I can feel this energy going from all over my body, in order to maintain this armament. I think that rather than my quirk being this black thing covering my heads, it's rather the energy used to maintain them. I wonder." He trailed off when he suddenly gasped as the energy cut off abruptly. He fell to the ground in exhaustion, and he panted as he watched the blackness receding back into his fingertips and disappearing entirely. It looks like if you use it for too long you will tire, and you won't be able to use it until the energy you spoke of replenishes again," she mused aloud as she looked at her exaggeratedly panting son with an amused, but happy and proud, smile on her face. Still, Izuku nodded his head, and he took a few seconds to gather back his breath. He slowly began to stand up. "Ugh, it feels like I was running away from Koch-chan and the others," he muttered a bit dazedly as he wobbled a bit in place. He shook his head and managed to focus again. He perked up as he looked at his hands. "I can feel the energy used to call up the armament beginning to fill back up slowly. I wonder what I can do to increase the amount I have, and how fast it replenishes. Also, what else can I do with this energy?" Inko made another mental note, this one about getting Izuku out of his habit of muttering aloud, since she knew it could be annoying to others. Gods knew how annoying it was to her when his father started to do it. "When you used your armament, I felt tense like when I was watching a horror movie and knew that something bad was about to happen, so maybe you can project the energy to intimidate others or something similar," she suggested, and when Izuku nodded at her in understanding she continued. "However, since we know you can create some kind of armor, I believe the best thing for now will be for you to learn how to fight and increase your physical abilities in general. You will learn more about your quirk as you grow." With a wide smile on his face, Izuku gave an enthusiastic nod of his head. Yes. Due to the times they were living in, neither Izuku nor his mother thought that his mysterious power could be something other than a quirk. Even though Izuku's power could be trained as such because at the end of the day it was still a power that affected the physical world, which meant that its growth could be affected by mundane physical and mental methods of training. In spite of this, Izuku's power was not a quirk. It was something much, much more. And its miraculous appearance was due to nothing more than the genuine and pure desire of a child to gain power, in order to become a hero that defended others. For as that famous saying goes, it only takes the will of a single man to change the world. The next 10 years for Izuku Midoriya were both informative and exciting. Learning everything he could about his quirk had been the best thing ever on his opinion. His quirk, which in a burst of sudden inspiration he had called Haki, ambition, because of how it worked, its effects and properties, was very powerful. Haki allowed him to do 3 things. Coat his body in a black substance that increased his strength exponentially and also worked like armor. Sense everything around him within his available range, as long as he was focusing on his 5 senses at the same time, while channeling the power that coursed through his body, and when he projected his power outside of his body, he could impose his will upon others to either intimidate, terrify or just render others unconscious. The reason why he had named his quirk that way was because in order to use it, he had to wish it with all his might to do whatever he wanted to do. For example, in order to use the first aspect of his quirk that was described above, which he simply referred to as armament, he needed to think with all his might that he was not going to get hurt no matter what, and that his physical strength was going to increase at the same time. It was a bit tricky to do so at the beginning, but after years of practice it was second nature for him to do so. Also, armament was not just a substance that covered his skin, but rather everything that was seemingly covered with armament became armament. It was the reason why it increased both his strength and defensive capabilities at the same time. To sense everything around him, which he called mantra, he had to focus on his senses of sight, hearing, smell, touch and even taste for some reason, while channeling energy continuously through his body. When he was focusing solely on it, he could detect everything in a radius of a whopping 1,000 feet. He had a passive range of 100 feet that he couldn't increase as much as he trained. In any case, the only time he was not aware of everything around him was when he was sleeping. Channeling his energy through his body constantly was something he did subconsciously after 10 years of experimenting with and improving the usage of his quirk. To actively use mantra while doing anything else that involved conscious thoughts was beyond him, no matter how much he trained to. And finally, to project his energy outside of his body in order to intimidate, scare or knock someone unconscious, which he called King's Will, he needed to almost forcefully pull out his energy outside of his body, while focusing on his intent. The only drawbacks of this aspect of his quirk were the fact that the stronger the will of the recipient, the more energy he had to put forward to have the effect he wanted, and the fact that the more he used it, the less powerful and efficient his other two aspects would be, until he replenished the amount of energy he lost when he used King's Will. After he consciously managed to manifest his quirk, his mother enrolled him in a dojo that taught a number of martial arts, of which Izuku had been able to choose from to better complement his quirk. Due to the properties of armament, the best styles of martial arts he could learn Muay Thai, Judo and Taekwondo. Thankfully, since the dojo was a mixed martial arts one, he was able to learn the three of them technically at the same time. After 10 years, thanks to his dedication, work ethic and surprising natural talent for the martial arts, he was a black belt on the three of them, and he could seamlessly mix techniques of the three arts when fighting. To train mantra up and get used to the number of things he could perceive, he took up meditation at the suggestion of the masters at the dojo when he explained to them what he could do. That led to the discovery that the amount of energy had at his disposal increased faster when he trained both his mind and his body. This resulted in Izuku also focusing with the same dedication on his studies, much to the delight of his mother, who had feared that his formal education was going to fall on the back burner, due to the focus Izuku put in developing his quirk. And finally, to train King's Will, he employed the unwilling help of random animals at the park, and the willing help of the other members of the dojo. It was thanks to this that he learned about the amount of power he needed for King's Will to be effective in proportion to the strength of the will of the target. It was easier to knock out, intimidate or scare a cat or a dog than it was to do the same thing to a kid his age. The same thing applied when doing it to a full-grown adult when compared to a kid his age. Thanks to now having a quirk, and one extremely powerful as his, Izuku changed a lot in his demeanor. Unlike Katsuki, however, Izuku changed for the better. He still had the desire to be a hero and defend anyone that couldn't do it themselves. He was still that noble kid that couldn't hold a serious grudge, and wanted to help everyone to be the best versions of themselves, no matter it took. Instead, what had changed in him was his attitude and temperament. He was very confident in himself and what he was capable of, thanks to what he achieved academically and in terms of martial arts and his quirk. He no longer was prone to nervous breakdowns, and it took a lot, emphasis on that, to intimidate him or scare him, likely a side effect of using King's Will so much. Also, due to the nature of his quirk and what he had to do in order to train it, he sometimes could come up as headstrong and stubborn if he wasn't careful. Because of how his quirk worked and the fact that Izuku didn't brag about it, everyone else at first thought that he didn't possess one. Heck, even now people thought that he doesn't have one. At the dojo, Izuku adapted rules which dictated how and when he used his quirk. 1. Fighting for the sake of fighting is strictly forbidden, except when it's for the purpose of sparring in order to practice techniques, or to defend himself from unprovoked harm. 2. Never use the techniques you learned against those who can't defend themselves. 3. Be the shield for those that can't protect themselves. And 4. If it was necessary, become the sword that strikes down the wicked with extreme prejudice. This resulted in Izuku being extremely subtle when using his quirk. He used armament beneath his clothes to protect himself from those that attempted to hit them, only for them to harm themselves when they struck something that felt like steel. Thanks to his passive use of mantra, he was never caught off guard, and when anyone tried to bully someone weaker than them when Izuku was in the vicinity, they suddenly found themselves terrified of their shadow. Because of this, they knew that Izuku had a quirk of some kind, they just didn't know just its nature. The only one who refused to believe this was Katsuki, who vehemently claimed that he would only believe it the moment Izuku showed it to everyone. And since that went directly against his code of conduct regarding his abilities, Izuku refused to do so. That never failed to anger Katsuki, who still though Izuku was a worthless quirkless delusional kid who was trying to compensate for something he was simply not destined for by learning martial arts. His anger and hatred for Izuku was such that even despite his admittedly observant and intelligent nature, he just couldn't see everything that pointed to Izuku having a quirk. That, or he just refused to admit it. Izuku didn't really care about what Katsuki thought. The explosion quirk user was just someone that Izuku couldn't stand because of his aggressive, aggravating, unpleasant and rude attitude. That, and the fact that Katsuki was not afraid of using his quirk to harm others in a whim, just rubbed him the wrong way. Yet, while he couldn't stand him, Izuku didn't hate him, so he just did his way to stay out of his way, but he refused to take any of his bullshit and back down when a confrontation was imminent. Truthfully, the only negative thing that happened to Izuku in the past 10 years was when his mother and father got a divorce. His mother got sick of his father being more out of the house than in it, and she decided to make it official and permanent. Inko had gotten used to it only being her and Izuku, and since the thought of her ex-husband filled her with irritation, the less said about the fights they had whenever he was home. In the end, the best course of action was to end things before they said or did anything they would regret. That didn't affect Izuku too much since he barely knew his father. He just felt relieved that the man that aggravated his mother so much was out of their lives for good. Now, Izuku was 14 years old, and the expectation and excitement in him grew more and more, as there was less than a year left before he could apply for UA High School. This was the years he was going to focus the most in his studies in martial arts, in order to increase the strength and effectiveness of his quirk, as after 10 years of experimenting and using it, he has essentially mastered using it. Truthfully, Izuku thought that this year's was going to be like all the previous one, albeit with him studying and exercising more exponentially, but that couldn't be farther from the truth, since something that will change his life even more. Something that will send him in the path of becoming the greatest and strongest hero in history. Alright, listen up. Since you are all in 3rd grade, now it's right time for you to think about your future, said the teacher with a flourish as he held a stack of papers in his hand. He was grinning from ear to ear. I will now distribute your career aspiration documents, but at least, for the most part, you all have the ambition of being heroes, right? He asked with his grin turning dreamy as he threw the stacks of paper into the air. The response of his class was a roar of approval as everyone gave a demonstration of their quirks. The notable exception was of a boy with spiky and curly black hair that had green highlights which curiously enough matched the color of his eyes. This was Izuku Midoriya, the one with the highest grades in class, and someone over whom there were still debates on whether he had a quirk or not. He was calmly writing on his notebook as he ignored the ruckus around him with seemingly practiced ease. Izuku was tall for his age, only lacking a few inches to reach 6 feet, and that was thanks to both the amount of exercise he did on a nearly daily basis and good genes. And it was thanks to only the former that he didn't look like a twig. While his uniform covered it for the most part, it was obvious to anyone that looked at him that Izuku was very muscular without being overly so. He was a fair bit bulkier than an Olympic swimmer, but was far from it being a bulging and lumbering mass of muscles. He was the perfect mix of power and speed. Think of Scott Adkins in the Undisputed movies. Due to having just the minimum amount of fat in his body to be healthy, Izuku's face was narrow. The freckles on his cheeks were a bit more pronounced on his cheekbones because of this. When he was relaxed, just like now, his eyes would stay in that normally roundish shape, but when he was angered or focused they would narrow to the point it seemed to change shape. Izuku didn't have the face of a male model, but he was far from being plain. As many would say, he was on this side of attractive. Well, I know that most of you have good quirks, but bear in mind that using them outside of sanctioned establishments when you are a minor and don't have a hero license, reminded the teacher kindly. Sir? Don't believe for a second that I am the same as the others here, barked Katsuki Bakugo with a derisive laugh from where he was sitting with his feet propped up on his desk. It isn't my intention to be seen as the same as those with weak quirks. Izuku's eyes flicked towards him for a second before he shook his head with a frown and went back to writing on his notebook. The only thing about Katsuki that had basically changed was everything that made him Katsuki was enhanced tenfold. He had inevitably and thankfully outgrown his more nasty habits, thankfully, but he was still a very unpleasant person. What do you mean by that, Katsuki? Shut up, father. Behave as such. The teacher perked up. Ah, yes. Bakugo-kun. You are going to apply to UA High School, yes. Izuku stopped writing, setting his pen next to his notebook as he did so, and he focused his attention on Katsuki. What? The best school for heroes in all Japan. It takes a total score of 79 to enter this year, right? And if that isn't enough, the entrance examination is the most difficult one too. Bakugo smirked when he saw that everyone else stopped glaring at him for his comment about them being fodder, and were now looking at him with wide eyes full of awe and fear. I'm not surprised that fodder such as yourself are quaking in their boots at the mere mention of UA High School. I will ace the entrance exams. I am the only one here that deserves to go there, he proclaimed, standing up and sending his desk and chair to the floor in a heap. With a savage grin on his face he continued his shouting. I will even surpass All Might, and then, I will become the highest ranked hero of all. I'll leave my name forever in the annual ranking of the richest people in the world. While everyone there stared at Katsuki with wide eyes due to his declaration, Izuku merely raised an unimpressed eyebrow before he sighed in exasperation with a shake of his head. He reached for his pencil to start writing again. He was planning the routine he was going to follow for the next 10 months, in preparation for the UA entrance examination. Since today was Friday, he had 2 other days to do so while just exercising as he had done always before he could start a more strict and demanding routine on Monday. Now that we are talking about it, I believe that Midoriya-kun also wishes to enter UA. Izuku stilled at the words of the teacher and the sudden silence. He looked up and he was not surprised to see the conflicted expressions on the faces of his classmates. While everyone there, bar a few notable exceptions, knew that Izuku had a quirk of some kind, no one there knew if it was strong enough to deserve a place at UA. There was also the fact that Izuku placed number 1 in the academic and physical aspects of the school's evaluations, so everyone there was unsure on how to react to that piece of news. Well, everyone but Deku, bellowed Katsuki as he turned towards his desk with his brightly glowing palm raised above his head to make Izuku's desk explode, along with that notebook of his in which he had been writing this whole time. You good for no? Katsuki was rudely interrupted when Izuku suddenly grabbed his wrist, before it could go lower than the height of the top of his head when he was sitting. In his surprise, Katsuki released the explosion from his palm, and the ball of fire and smoke resounded harmlessly on top of everyone's head. Katsuki gritted his teeth in discomfort when Izuku tightened the hold he had around his wrist, while he pinned him down with his disapproving glare. As the teacher pointed out just a minute ago, we are not allowed to use our quirks outside of sanctioned establishments. That goes double for you, Bakugo, considering how volatile your quirk is, he admonished strongly as he released Katsuki's wrist from his grip. Katsuki glared at Izuku as he gritted his teeth. Our quirks? You don't even have a quirk, you stupid nerd. Martial arts is the only thing you've got, and that ain't gonna make the cut, and yet you're insulting me by trying to compete in the same league as me, huh? Izuku shook his head. I do have a quirk. Whether you feel insulted or not about me applying for UA is none of my concern, nor the fact that I am applying should be of yours for that matter, he replied calmly. Katsuki's fists began to smoke as he glared at Izuku with hatred. What do you mean by that? That you shouldn't use your more powerful quirk to try to intimidate others into not attempting to reach further than you out of fear, having your massive and frail pride wounded when you eventually discover that there are those who have a vastly stronger quirk than yours, he replied, his tone calm, but there was a hint of amusement in it too. An artery pulsed in Katsuki's forehead as he snarled at Izuku. What are you implying, you shitston? The bell that indicated the end of that period and the start of the morning recess chose that moment to make its appearance. Izuku sighed, and with a shake of his head he stood up, deftly collecting his utensils and grabbing his notebook which he held in his hands. It was in that moment when he noticed that his classmates and teacher had pressed themselves to the furthest wall of the classroom, so they could stay away of the argument, knowing that collateral damage could befall to those that strayed too close to them when they argued. He snorted in amusement and began to walk in the direction of the door. I'm implying nothing, he said simply before he grabbed the handle of the door, slid it open, stepped outside and closed it behind him without looking back. A few steps later he sighed in tired exasperation when he heard an explosion and a bellow of rage. Knowing that there was nothing he could do about it now, he just continued walking towards the cafeteria. He was a bit hungry, and he still had 3/4 of a routine to plan out. No? Stop that thief. Everyone turned towards the noise to see a vaguely humanoid-shaped pile of mud with eyes and sharp teeth running away with a purse somehow held in his hand. Catch me if you can. He laughed, his voice sounding as disgusting as he looked. The blonde-haired man with a skeletal and sunken appearance walked out of a nearby supermarket and started to take in the situation. Someone is coming to deal with that dude, right? He is just taking advantage of how busy mornings are to get away with what he wants. People who abuse their quirks are everywhere. The overly skinny man's height and muscle mass suddenly increased as he transformed, and a grin appeared on his face. No need to worry. Why, you ask? Because I am here. Everyone turned around to the sound of that bellowing voice only for their eyes to widen in disbelief and awe. Holy shit. Now fucking way. It's... The incident this morning with that sludge villain happened across the route I normally take home. Since it's been a few hours since it happened, it should be clear by now. I don't miss my daily run, thought Izuku as he idly looked at his smartphone. With a nod of his head he locked his screen and slipped it into his pocket. He then stood up from his chair, picked up his backpack which he strapped to his back, and began to walk towards the door of the classroom. Oi, Deku, where the fuck do you think you are going, huh? I have unfinished business with you. Izuku paused and he turned towards Katsuki to see him stalking aggressively towards him. Those who have no let for their homes and were still in the classroom started to back away as they looked at them warily. Izuku huffed in annoyance, and he used that to power up a mild king's will, with the intent to intimidate and put an annoyed glare on his face. And I don't have to waste on those business of yours. Katsuki took a step back, paled and shuddered before he caught himself. What the fuck? Why am I backing away from Deku off all fucking people? He shouted to himself on his mind as he looked on with disbelief. As was the norm with him, anger started to build up. He refused to believe that he actually had a quirk. He never used it to his benefit. Never showed it off no matter the many chances he got to do so. Someone that didn't use their quirk, in Katsuki's mind, was either lying about it, or was ashamed about how useless it was. Not wanting to waste the opportunity to get away without wasting any more time, Izuku nodded at his former friend tightly. Good day, he said simply before he hurried out of the room before Katsuki could waste more of his time. He smiled in amusement when he heard the angered shout and explosion a few seconds after he crossed the school's gate. As he made his way towards his head, Izuku thought about what he had accomplished on planning his training routine. His goal for the next 10 months was to increase the amount of energy he had at his disposal, to use the three aspects of his quirk more effectively, and for longer periods of time, and to increase the speed and strength of his body without using his quirk, which would result in them increasing more when he used armament. Thankfully, he could accomplish all that by increasing the intensity of his training, and the amount of time he spent at it, along with increasing the amount of time he spent studying concepts new to him in meditation. Sadly, he was going to stop reading comics and playing video games if he was going to have time to accomplish something worthwhile in the next 10 months, but sacrifices must be made if one wanted to accomplish one's goals, and Izuku was more than ready and willing to make those sacrifices. Izuku arrived at his home, which was located at the top of a building that functioned as an apartment complex, and he went into his modest house using his own set of keys. I'm home, he announced as he took off his shoes and made his way to his room. Welcome back, honey. I'm in the kitchen. He heard the voice of his mother yell from the direction she told him she was. He yelled back in acknowledgement to her just before he went into his room and closed the door behind him. His room wasn't big nor small, and due to the discipline of conduct that was instilled in him by both his mother and his martial arts masters, it was very neat and organized. Not even the number of posters of his favorite heroes that littered the room gave his room a disorganized feel. Izuku left his backpack on top of his desk, right next to his laptop, and put his phone to charge, since he was going to need the extra power in it for the next few hours. He then stripped off his uniform and put in the basin that would indicate his mother that it needed washing. Not pausing for a second, Izuku went into his closet and pulled out one of the many sets of workout clothes he owned. Since it was the summer, he went with a sleeveless zip-up shirt that had a hoodie, running shorts and sneakers that went above his ankles. Izuku then exited his room and went to the kitchen where he found his mother typing on her own laptop while sitting in the kitchen table, documents arranged around her. After she got a considerable amount of money from her divorce, she looked into many investments plans she could follow, in order to be able to provide for herself and her son, without the aid of her ex-husband. It was even to that point that she didn't want him on their lives anymore. Following those plans she had been very successful, and she had enough money that she was never going to worry about it in the future, and she could spend a considerable amount of it on a whim without too much thought. And in any case, neither she or Izuku desired fancy things or lavish lifestyle, and merely settled for buying things they needed and for their hobbies, which were collecting anything hero-related, video games and a membership at the local gym for Izuku, and watching movies, reading books and getting the latest clothes for Inko. Even though Inko was far from vain, she was still a woman, and she liked to feel attractive, even though she didn't have a partner nor interest in having one. It was the reason why she also had a membership at the local gym to which she frequented regularly. Because of that, Inko had hardly changed in the past 10 years. Hell, if one asked someone that knew her from back there, they would say she had gotten even more beautiful with the years. Hey mom, he greeted casually as he made a beeline for the fridge, where he procured a special drink that had the electrolytes necessary for him to get the most of his exercises. As he prepared his drink, he nodded upwards in the direction of her laptop. What are you working on over there? Inko waved one hand airily over her head. Nothing much. I'm just comparing the income of Mitsuki's clothing shop from this year with the one from last year. I also need to check the current income and predictions of future incomes of the companies and business I have actions in, and that is going to take me what's rest of the afternoon, so that means we are probably going to have to order something for dinner. Izuku's eyes lit up. Can we get katsudon from Murayama's? He asked hopefully. That was his favorite food, and Murayama's had the best by far in the entire town. Also, it has been almost 2 weeks since he had any. He needed his fix ASAP. Inko rolled her eyes with a snort of amusement. Of course, we can, Izuku, she agreed easily. Well, she preferred curry, they had that a few days ago, and she had to admit that Murayama's katsudon was divine. She peered at her son with curious eyes as he downed red drink that he claimed helped him with his exercises. How was your day at school? Izuku finished his drink and he smacked his lips, enjoying the light flavor of strawberry of the drink he just drank. You know, same old, same old. Had to spend the entire day switching from meditating and listening to the teachers drone about things I already know, he said with some annoyance, and her lips twitched when one of the muscle on his cheek and forehead twitched in irritation as he continued. And Bakugo was being his usual charming self today too. Man, it's getting harder and harder to not use my quirk to beat some sense into him. That would be going against his code after all. I have spoken to Mitsuki about it, but she isn't too worried. Bakugo-kun may act like that at school, but she actually has a tight leash on him at home. He no longer picks on others with anything other than words, and no one can deny that he has a genuine desire to be a hero. It might be for entirely selfish reasons, yes, but that's better than becoming villain, gods forbid, she said, actually shuddering at the thought of someone like Katsuki Bakugo becoming a villain with a quirk as powerful as his. Izuku nodded easily in agreement. He could concede that point. He is still annoying though. That temper and mouth of his are going to get him in trouble eventually, he said with certainty. The only reason why Izuku had not delivered the mother of all beatdown on Katsuki himself was because of his rules of conduct. Otherwise, he would have put the explosive blonde on his place a long time ago. That's because of the ridiculous number of hormones going through his body right now, she said offhandedly. When her answer was silence, she looked up to see the raised eyebrow that Izuku was giving him, and she snorted. Don't even think of you comparing yourself to him on that matter. Well, you are the same age, the number of mental and control exercises you put yourself through every day, make it only so your body is affected by those hormones. And don't let me get started on the effects of you working out. And Inko meant that. She might be his mother, but she wasn't afraid to admit that her son was attractive. Her friends never failed to mention it whenever they got together. She knew that he was going to have to beat off girls with a stick in the very near future. Izuku blushed at the pointed and appreciative look his mother gave him, and he coughed uncomfortably into his fist. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of working out. Next morning I'm going to up the intensity of my routine. I only have 10 months before I can apply for UA, and I need to prepare as much as I can. So. Inko chuckled and nodded in understanding. I'll make sure that all of your meals from Monday onwards complement your new routine. Knowing you are going to work in speed and strength, right? She asked, focusing back on her computer so she could make a reminder in effect to that. Yep, nodded Izuku. Thanks mom. You are the best. I'll see you when I come back from my run, he said before wrapping an arm around his mother's head and bringing it into his hard stomach for a hug. She laughed as he did so, and she met in happiness when he bent down to give her a kiss on the top of her head. Izuku walked back into his room in order to get his smartphone and customized breathing mask. He strapped his phone to his right bicep, and then did the same with his mask, which went around his head and covered his lower face and ears. He loved this mask because it also had speakers that connected to his phone via Bluetooth, meaning that he could hear his favorite songs while he exercised. He then stepped out of his house, stretched for a bit the moment he reached the streets and started a slow jog, after pulling the hood of his zip-up shirt over his head. Izuku had been running for about 40 minutes now, and despite the fact that he was sweating buckets, he wasn't tired, nor breathing harshly, nor were his muscles aching. Well, that was mainly due to his incredible stamina, which he has been cultivating in the past 10 years. It was also due to his breathing mask, that allowed him to take in a larger concentration oxygen with each breath, and the drink he had, while he was speaking with his mother. And if you included that he was currently listening to Eminem till I collapse, he was actually having a really good time running as he thought about what other things he could include into his training routine and his quirk. For example, he currently was thinking on why whenever he listened to music using his headsets of the speakers of his breathing mask, his passive range with mantra was automatically reduced to 80 feet. It was likely that since that aspect of his quirk used all 5 of his senses, cutting one of them off from the environment resulted the immediate loss of 20% of its effectiveness. It was the logical thing to assume. He was going to have to experiment further with that in the future. Perhaps that was the start on going on the right path on increasing the passive range of mantra. While being aware of everything around you in a radius of even 10 feet, and Izuku was capable of that 10 times over, was enough to not get caught off war. The larger his range, the more time Izuku had to respond to what he was perceiving. Izuku was currently going through a tunnel, and he just passed a sealed sewer entrance when he abruptly stopped as he felt something moving very fast entering his reduced field of perception right below him. Not 5 seconds passed when suddenly, from the gaps in the lid of the entrance of the sewer, a disgustingly brownish-green sludge began to rise. "What the?" he muttered, his voice muffled due to his mask. The sludge coalesced into a disgusting mass that almost reached the ceiling of the tunnel, and Izuku could make out a set of yellow eyes and a white mouth filled with sharp teeth. A medium-sized invisibility cloak was enough to give him the slip, muttered the thing with a voice as disgusting as it looked. It finally caught sight of Izuku, and its yellow eyes perked up with glee as it grinned evilly. "Oh, what a wonderful body you have," it declared creepily before tentacles of sludge shot forward with clear intent of grabbing him. Izuku ducked under the first one, and he jumped back to avoid being grabbed by the second one, his hood slipping off his head with a sudden motion. He glared at the disgusting thing in front of him as he slipped into his fighting stance. Since he was right-handed, his left flank was facing his opponent with his right arm cocked back and bent at the elbow, his right fist at the same height as his head. His left arm was extended forward with his palm loose ready to block, parry or grab any attack. And finally, his legs were spread a bit wider than his shoulders with his knees slightly bent, ready to move at a moment's notice. This was the opening stance for his personal style that mixed Muay Thai, Taekwondo and Judo. Judging by his appearance, this is probably the petty thief that caused this morning's incident, thought Izuku as he took in his opponent. I know he can move really fast, but he is remaining stationary, likely meaning that his moving speed can only be achieved in short bursts. Also, I'm fast enough to comfortably avoid his tentacle attacks. If I keep my distance, I can probably stay out of harm's way until a pro hero arrives to deal with him. Something in his tone tell me that he's not going to let me run away freely. Don't try to resist, kid. I'm just going to take over your body. I promise you that it's only going to hurt for about 45 seconds before you can't feel anything else, the sludge villain said with a note of irritation in his voice, before sending numerous tentacles in Izuku's way with the intention of wrapping them around him, so he could bring him closer to him to initiate the process of taking over his body. With luck, the boy had a quirk powerful enough to face him. Izuku had other plans, however. With liberal use of the almost absolute awareness that Manter gave him, Izuku knew where each tentacle was, the angle from which it was going to come from, their intended target on his body, and the speed in which they were going to come. While knowing that wasn't enough to counter them, since his body needed to be fast enough to react to what his mind was processing, in this case that didn't matter because Izuku was fast enough to do that with almost insulting ease. So, Toshinori Yagi, or as he was considerably better known as, All Might, was understandably impressed and a bit shocked when he climbed out of the sewers to see a teen that couldn't be older than 15, evading the attacks of a villain that had managed to escape him, the currently #1 hero, with a grace and control of movement that he had seldom seen before. He noticed that the lad's green eyes were focused solely on main body of the sludge villain. He is not looking at the tentacles, yet he is evading them all without failing, thought All Might as he watched the teen flip over tentacle that attempted to strike his legs under him, only to fall into a handstand, in which he flexed his elbows and tucked his knees into his stomach to avoid another sludge tentacle that reached for his feet. Then he used his arms to shoot into the air and went into a barrel roll to evade 2 other tentacles, without possibly looking at them. Some kind of perception quirk, perhaps. That would also explain why his body looks more prepared than even mine when I received one for all. That means that this kid is smart enough to think of ways in which he could better complement his quirk. It took him less than 10 seconds to realize all that, and he cursed himself for getting caught up in admiring new promising talent when he still had a job to do. So, All Might, not wanting to risk the well-being of a civilian, decided to announce his presence and finish the job that he started this morning. I am here, he declared and gave a mental sigh of relief when the sludge villain immediately stopped focusing on the boy and turned to him. You? Shouted the sludge villain with hatred before it sent a tentacle of sludge with a bit more power and speed when compared to the ones that he had been using against Izuku, who by the way was just standing there staring with wide eyes at All Might while his arms hung limply at his sides. All Might quickly ducked under the attack, ignoring the small debris that fell on his back from it colliding against the concrete of the tunnel. Cocking his fist back, he made the necessary adjustments, so his next action didn't affect the boy he had just saved. Texas. He shot his fist forward, generating enough wind pressure for it to be visible to the naked eye. Smash. Izuku braced himself as the strong winds generated by All Might's attack buffeted him, and he couldn't take his eyes away, as he watched the wind pressure that was directed slightly upwards, so it won't reach him and harm him, essentially disintegrating the sludge villain like it was nothing. Soon it was over and he still couldn't move a muscle as he watched with awe as the number one hero, and his idol, All Might, used an empty bottle to collect the remains of the sludge villain that housed his consciousness, which was the bit that held the eyes and mouth. "Hey, young man. Are you alright?" Izuku snapped out of his reverie the moment All Might addressed him directly. He looked up at him, admiring his famous and fearless grin for a moment before he managed to formulate a response. Yes. I'm perfectly fine, All Might. You arrived right in time, just like you always do." The praise and worship came out naturally and without him thinking it as he got stars in his eyes. All Might laughed loudly. Izuku gushed. "If that's the case, then I'm glad. I'm sorry I got you involved with that villain. I don't usually make rookie mistakes like that. But, in any case, you were a very big help. Thank you. I managed to capture him safely," he declared, making a pose while holding the bottles containing the sludge villain and grinning, his teeth sparkling by reflecting the light of the sun, since they were now outside of the tunnel. "It doesn't matter that he looks so different in person, he is still very cool," thought Izuku admiringly, with stars still in his eyes. "Shit. I'm only a few seconds away from reaching my limit. I have to go now," thought Toshinori as he slipped the 2 bottles containing the defeated villain into the pockets of his cargo pants. "Well, I must take this guy to the authorities. Keep practicing with your quirk and you will become a great hero one day. Perhaps one day you will return the favor from today. I will be counting with your support." With that said, All Might flexed his knees and shot into the air, sending everything not firmly adhered to the ground flying, because of the winds generated by the force of his jump. He was going to stop at one of the rooftops to rest for a bit and regain some strength before delivering the villain. In his haste, All Might forgot to secure the bottles, and they fell to the ground below a few moments before he reached the rooftop. He was not going to realize this until later. Back in with Izuku, he was shaking in excitement with a huge grin that was being concealed by his mask, but its presence was betrayed by his almost crinkled closed eyes. "I just met All Might, and he told me I could become a great hero in the future. Forget Monday. I'm starting my new routine right now," he shouted gleefully in his mind as he started to sprint at his top speed, which was considerably faster than what could be achieved by someone without a quirk that could be used to augment one's moving speed. "Today is the best day ever," he declared with a happy laugh. "Oh, poor Izuku, you don't even know the first thing of it. That motherfucker, Deku. I'll show him the next time I see him," snarled Bakugo as he crushed an empty can of soda which he threw away in his rage. "You need to calm down, Katsuki. Aren't you childhood friends with him?" asked one of his lackeys as he took a drag from his cigarette. "You're not going to like it if you push Midoriya too far. That guy's mysterious quirk is quite scary after all," said the other one, the one that could extend the length of his finger, which he did in order to reach for a cigarette without extending his entire arm. Katsuki turned his glare towards the one with long fingers. "What the fuck are you talking about? That worthless piece of shit Deku doesn't have a quirk," he bellowed, kicking a set of bottles that had disgusting content in them. His other friend exhaled some smoke. "He does have a quirk, Katsuki. We don't just know the nature of it." When Mitsuda tried to punch him once in the stomach, all the bones in his hand broke along with dislocating his wrist, and Mitsuda is made of stone. And with how many times two interact with each other, I would have thought you would notice how easy it is for him to intimidate others with just a look, and how he always seems to know where everyone and anything is. Katsuki growled before scoffing in derision. "You're right, as if. Mitsuda is an idiot who probably made this story up to not embarrass himself. I'm sure he injured himself somehow. And for the other things it must have been coincidences or something to do with his martial arts," he said, refusing to acknowledge that someone with a quirk would not show it off. Besides, Deku didn't develop a quirk when they were 4 years old, and the rumors about him having one started only 2 years ago. It was impossible for a quirk to manifest at that age after all. Instead, Katsuki focused on another thing, sick of being angry at someone who in his mind was worthless. "And what have I told you about smoking when I'm around? That's going to reflect badly on me, so fucking stop it, you moron." As he turned around, he didn't see the terrifying mass of sludge that suddenly rose from the ground. Invisibility cloak. With a powerful quirk. His friends, however, did. "What the fuck? Katsuki, look out." "Ha." Toshinori Yagi sighed as he leaned his back against the railing of the rooftop of the building he had chosen to rest, in order to get few more minutes to use one for all, so he could deliver the villain he just defeated without revealing his secret. Finding a successor to pass the torch of his power was becoming a top priority, so much that it was becoming a very major distraction. Proof of this was how that third-rate villain managed to somehow give him the slip for hours. And to be honest, you couldn't really blame Toshinori for it. Ever since his fight with that man 5 years ago, the need to pass on his power to someone that wasn't as limited as he was now became something that he must do before that man recovered from his injuries and attempted to regain control he used to have of Japan. Weakened and limited as he was now, a fight with that man right now was something he couldn't afford to have without sacrificing something that he could easily come to regret later. It was the reason why he had come to Japan, in order to find a successor for his power. It didn't matter to him if they already had a quirk or not. Japan, along with the United States of America, China, India were the countries with the biggest concentration of quirk users because of the amount of people that lived there. So, it was in those places that All Might felt he had the best chances of finding a successor. Even more so as he was going to be teaching at UAS starting the next year. He hoped to find someone worthy of his power there. Because if he didn't, they were all doomed. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion, and Toshinori shot to his feet and looked in the direction of the explosion. It was then when he noticed the lack of a substantial weight in his pockets, and he looked down only for his eyes to widen when he saw that the bottle containing the sludge villain was not there. This can't be happening. Izuku was almost reaching the point where he needed to turn around in order to go back to his home for the second part of his run, when heard the explosion, even over the sound of the music he was hearing. Pricking up, he changed directions and began to run in the direction from which the sound of the explosion had come from. While he managed to catch a glimpse of the pro heroes that were in patrol today earlier in the morning, he was not going to pass up the opportunity to do so again. It only took him a few minutes, in which a few more explosions resounded, to reach the site of the disaster, and his eyes widened when he saw the amount of people there looking on into the street that was littered with destroyed property and burning asphalt. Still, even with the big crowd of people watching on, he managed to make out the heroes that were trying to deal with the situation, and just like he expected, they were the same ones from this morning. They weren't easy to miss. Death Arms was holding back the crowd from approaching the danger zone from one end of the street, and Mount Lady was doing the same from the other end. Backdraft was doing his best to control the fires that were threatening to increase in intensity, and Shinran Kamui was using his wood powers to reduce the amount of destruction that was being caused. It was then when noticed the villain and his eyes widened when he saw that it was the sludge villain from half an hour ago. He managed to escape All Might again. This guy must be very good, he thought as he noticed that none of the heroes were trying to fight him. It took him a few seconds to realize why. His sludge form likely gives him a resistance against physical blows, which means that Death Arms can't do much to him. Since Shinran Kamui's powers are based off wood, with the explosions the villain is causing a fight between them would result in Kamui's quick defeat. Backdraft isn't fighter, so the only thing he can do is control the fires as best as he can. And finally, it seems like Mount Lady isn't able to control how much she grows, and she can't step in due to the size of the street. Hey, why are the heroes not fighting the villain? A schoolboy got caught. The villain is using his quirk to cause the explosions, and the heroes cannot act in fear of harming him. Izuku's eyes widened when he heard this, and he focused his eyes more on the form of the villain, only to gasp when he saw the sludge of the villain covering the form of one Katsuki Bakugo, the person whom he disliked the most in the entire world, some whose eyes were normally filled with arrogance and contempt, but now were filled with despair and pain, as he pleaded for someone to help him. Izuku didn't even think about it. Toshinori arrived at the scene only for his sunken eyes to widen when he saw the boy from earlier frantically running towards the villain, ignoring the shouts of everyone else calling him to stop. That idiot. What the hell is he thinking? A perception quirk such as his is not going to be of any help in a situation like this. He is going to get himself killed, and there is nothing I can do right now. I'm so pathetic. He thought to himself in anger as he looked on helplessly. Those feelings, however, weren't going to last for much longer. Play hero by Skillet. Bakugo! Shouted Izuku as he ran towards them faster than he had ever done before. He ignored the blistering heat of the flames and the debris littering the street, evading them without losing speed. As a matter of fact, he was steadily going faster, shocking those that were observant enough to notice it. You? Shouted the sludge villain with a growl as he cocked a brightly glowing fist back. Katsuki's eyes widened in disbelief when he saw Izuku of all people running towards him with worried expression on his face. Expression contorting into a glare, Izuku focused his king's will with the intent to intimidate on the sludge villain, making him falter seemingly out of nowhere as he hesitated, and his fist stopped glowing with the power of his hostage's quirk. Only the pro heroes there noticed this, and quickly deduced that whatever had happened to make the villain stop his attack was obviously done by the reckless boy running towards him. Then, shocking everyone there further, Izuku activated armament on his legs, covering them with the black substance, as he bent his right knee, when his right foot touched the ground as he continued to run, out of the sudden sending himself forward at easily 10 times the speed he had before, leaving a 10 feet wide and 2 feet deep crater in the place where he had stepped with his right foot, and creating a shockwave that misplaced the air at the sudden increase of his speed. He was also carving a trench of destroyed concrete in his path forward. What the hell? Screamed All Might in his mind when he saw this. That amount of power can easily match One for All at 25%. Just what in the hell is the nature of this kid's quirk? Izuku covered the remaining distance between him and the sludge villain in the blink of an eye, and he latched onto the villain, glaring heatedly into his eyes. "I'm not going to let you harm him anymore," he shouted in defiance, his voice being heard clearly despite it being muffled by his mask. He cocked his left arm back and lashed out forwards with it, burying it up to his forearm into the form of the villain, and grasping Bakugo by his clothes. Katsuki glared at Izuku as he felt him grab his clothes. "Why are you doing this, Deku?" Izuku turned his glare towards Katsuki. "Shut up, you idiot," he said, and he activated armament on his left arm, noticing how Katsuki's eyes widened in shock as he saw this. Not wasting any second, Izuku tucked his knees into his body and pressed the sole of his feet into the villain, before he kicked out with both of his legs, separating himself and pulling out Bakugo from the villain, who was sent flying backwards a few dozen feet away, yelling in pain. Izuku flipped backwards to gain control of his airborne body, and he landed on his feet, skidding backwards and destroying more concrete as his feet dug into the ground. He dropped Bakugo unceremoniously on the ground as he glared at the villain that was rubbing at the place where he had kicked him, where he could see the indents of his boot healing, as they were covered with more sludge. "I thought he was impervious to physical attacks, but I managed to hurt him. Was it because of armament?" The pro heroes there were thinking the same, unknown to him. "Deku," growled Katsuki as he looked up at him from his place on the floor. Izuku's eyes flickered towards him as he slowly slipped into the opening stance of his fighting style. "We might hate each other, Bakugo, but let me remind you that my dream is to become a hero," said Izuku, his muffled voice being heard loud and clear, as his right arm was covered by the black substance of armament. "It's a hero's duty to put his life in the line to defend those that can't do it for themselves. That, and because your eyes were honestly calling for help." All Might felt as if his predecessor had just smacked him with all her strength back when she was training him to inherit One for All. The boy's words struck a chord within him, and a happy grin appeared on his face, as he watched the boy shot himself forward again without hesitation, and with even more speed and power than the first time he did so. He watched as the kid almost negligently parried the attacks of the sludge villain without slowing down, shooting himself up in the air, evading even more tentacles of sludge, and appearing right above the villain with his fist cocked back. Armament Haki. Hammer arm. The boy then proceeded to punch the villain with enough strength that his fist created a shockwave of displaced air and a crater as wide as the street, and as deep as All Might was tall when he was using One for All, as the villain was knocked unconscious, and sludge was plastered all over the place. All Might's grin couldn't get any wider as he saw the boy standing over the defeated form of the villain, his right arm smoking, due to the power of his punch. Toshinori Yagi ignored the cheers of the crowd as they rushed forward. He stood there, legs frozen as his entire body shook in excitement and happiness. "I found him. I finally found him. Prepare yourself, Izuku Midoriya, for unknown to you the real start of the rest of your life begun now. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious.